What if the dead could speak? Not with words, not with sound, but through the air, through the cold silence that hangs above their graves. Imagine a place forgotten by time, a cemetery so ancient that even maps refuse to remember it. The earth there breathes differently, and the shadows whisper names that were lost centuries ago. Today, we're traveling to a forgotten town, Graven Hollow. Once alive, now erased. No one remembers its stories, but beneath the soil, the dead still do. So, are you ready to hear their whispers? It was a gray October morning when Elias Crowther, a freelance historian and travel documentarian, set out toward the forgotten town of Graven Hollow. He had read about it in an old local newspaper from 1896, a small column mentioning a cemetery untouched since the town's demise. There were no records of the town afterward, no population archives, no photographs, as if the entire place had been deliberately erased. Elias loved mysteries like this. His online channel, Echoes Beneath, explored haunted ruins and places where time stood still. But this time felt different. The locals he'd questioned in the nearby town of Heralford refused to talk about Graven Hollow. One old man at the gas station had muttered, "That place ain't empty, lad. It listens." The drive took nearly 4 hours through winding, leaf-strewn back roads. The GPS signal flickered in and out. Around him, fog clung low to the ground like a living thing, curling around the tires and swallowing the road ahead. The further he drove, the quieter the world became. No birds, no wind. Even the engine seemed to hum softly, as though afraid to disturb something ancient. After what felt like an endless drive, Elias reached a rusted sign almost hidden beneath ivy and moss. The letters were barely visible, but he could just make out the faded words. "Welcome to Graven Hollow, EST 1782. The air changed the moment he stepped out of his car. It was heavy, not cold, but thick, like standing underwater. He noticed that the usual forest sounds, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets, were gone. Complete silence surrounded him. With his camera in hand, Elias began recording. "This is the town of Graven Hollow," he said softly, his voice echoing faintly in the still air. "No official records remain, but I'm here to find its cemetery, rumored to hold the oldest graves in this region, and maybe the reason the town vanished." He followed what looked like an old cobblestone path, half swallowed by dirt and roots. The road led through collapsing wooden houses and a skeletal church with its bell tower broken in half. Nature had reclaimed everything. Ivy crawling through shattered windows, trees sprouting through rooftops. But then, something strange caught his eye. On the cracked church door, there were symbols carved deep into the wood, circles intersecting with lines, like a map or a seal. Beneath it, faint words scratched in shaky handwriting. "They don't rest here." Elias paused, staring at the message. His flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied again. He swallowed hard, forcing a nervous laugh for his recording. "Looks like someone wanted to keep me out. Guess that means I'm going the right way." Beyond the church, the path opened into a clearing, and there it was. The cemetery. It stretched farther than he could see, rows upon rows of weathered tombstones leaning at odd angles. Many were broken or sunk halfway into the earth. Ancient trees loomed over them, their branches tangled like skeletal hands. Elias walked slowly through the entrance, the metal gate creaking as though it hadn't been touched in 100 years. The moment he stepped inside, a faint sound brushed his ears. Not wind, not animals, something softer, like a whisper. He froze. The sound faded. He shook his head, telling himself it was imagination. He continued filming, describing the strange carvings, the peculiar smell of damp earth, and the chill that seemed to rise from the ground itself. But as he moved deeper into the graveyard, something shifted again, a sensation, almost like static electricity crawling over his skin. His camera's battery indicator dropped from 87% to 12% in a blink. Elias frowned. "That's impossible," he murmured. "I just charged this thing." Then the whisper came again, this time clearer. A woman's voice, faint, trembling, carried by the still air. "Leave before they wake." The camera jerked as Elias spun around, light cutting through the fog, but there was no one there. Just gravestones. Endless, silent gravestones. He took a shaky breath, forcing a nervous smile. "If that was you, ma'am, you've got my attention." He laughed weakly, but inside, his pulse raced. He didn't believe in ghosts, not really. But something about this place, it felt aware of him, as if every tombstone had turned to watch. Unknowingly, he had just stepped onto ground that hadn't been disturbed in over 200 years. And the dead, the ones who didn't rest here, had noticed. The fog had thickened around the cemetery like a shroud. Elias stood frozen beside a cracked tombstone, his breath misting in the cold air. The whisper still echoed faintly in his ears, a woman's voice, soft and distant, warning him to leave. He turned off the camera for a moment and rubbed his arms, trying to shake the growing chill that clung to his skin. "Get it together, Elias," he muttered. "It's just wind, or maybe a sound glitch." But deep down, he knew the air hadn't moved. The silence was too perfect, too heavy. As he made his way deeper between the gravestones, his flashlight beam caught a flicker of movement, a shadow near the far side of the cemetery wall. Someone was standing there. Elias called out, "Hey, hello? Are you?" The figure turned slightly. It was an old man, thin and hunched, wearing a tattered brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat, so worn it looked older than the town itself. His face was weathered, eyes pale as frost, and when he spoke, his voice rasped like dry leaves scraping across stone. "You shouldn't be here." Elias blinked, lowering his camera. "I didn't mean to trespass. I'm documenting this place. You're from here." The man's lips twitched into a half-smile that wasn't friendly. "No one's from here anymore. They all went quiet a long time ago." Elias hesitated. "Then who are you?" The old man turned his gaze toward the rows of graves, as if listening to something Elias couldn't hear. "Some call me the Keeper," he said finally. "I stay to make sure no one digs too deep. Some things are buried for a reason." There was a long pause. The fog swirled between them, whispering softly against the stones. "I heard something," Elias said quietly. "A woman's voice. It said, 'Leave before they wake.' What does that mean?" The old man's head tilted slightly, and his eyes darkened. "Then they've noticed you." "What do you mean, they?" Elias asked, his tone tightening. The Keeper's expression hardened. "The ones who never found rest. The townsfolk of Graven Hollow didn't die naturally. This ground isn't holy anymore. It's a prison." Elias frowned, glancing at his camera. "A prison? For who?" "For those who broke the pact," the old man whispered. "They built this cemetery before the town itself, a sacred boundary to contain what they'd unleashed. But when the last church bell fell silent, the pact failed. The town died in one night, and the dead refused to stay dead." Elias felt a chill crawl up his neck. "You're saying this cemetery holds cursed souls?" The Keeper's gaze cut back to him sharply. "Not just cursed, bound. Every name on those stones was part of the ritual, and every one of them wants out." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint creaking of branches swaying in the mist. Elias forced a shaky laugh. "You're telling me this entire place is, what, haunted by an ancient ritual gone wrong?" The old man didn't answer. He just stepped closer, his boots crunching softly over the damp earth. "You carry metal," he murmured. "That's good. Keep it close. They can't cross iron. But don't touch the graves. Don't film their names. And if you hear the bell..." He stopped. His eyes widened slightly, and Elias felt his stomach drop. From somewhere deep within the fog, a faint sound rang out. Dawn. A single hollow toll. Then silence. Elias stared at the old man. "What was that?" The Keeper whispered. Too late. Before Elias could speak, the fog seemed to move, not with the wind, but with purpose. It coiled between the graves like something alive. Shapes began to form. Faint outlines of figures, transparent and flickering, as if trapped between light and shadow. Elias stumbled back, heart pounding. "What the hell is that?" "The ones who remember," the keeper hissed. "They've seen your light, your camera. You've woken them." Elias raised his flashlight, but the beam only made the figures clearer. Dozens of them. Men, women, even children, standing among the gravestones, their hollow eyes fixed on him. Their mouths opened soundlessly, and then, faintly, came the whispers. Soft at first, then rising. "Elias." He came back. He must finish what began. His camera blinked red, recording automatically, even though he hadn't touched it. The screen flickered, distorting the faces of the figures into warped, unnatural forms. "Run," the keeper snapped, "before they take your name." Elias hesitated, gripping his camera tighter. "What do you mean, my name?" The keeper's voice dropped to a whisper. "Once they speak it, you belong to them." Without another word, Elias turned and bolted through the fog, his footsteps echoing in the silent graveyard. Behind him, the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a haunting chorus that seemed to follow him. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the cemetery. But when he looked back, the old man was gone. Only the fog remained, thick, shifting, and watching. Elias didn't stop running until he reached the edge of the cemetery. His lungs burned, and his hands trembled as he fumbled to turn off his camera, but it refused to shut down. The red recording light kept blinking, even as static flickered across the screen. He stood there for a long moment, trying to steady his breathing. The fog had grown heavier, pressing close like a living thing. The gate he had entered through was barely visible now, swallowed by the gray mist. The old man, the keeper, had vanished without a trace. No footprints, no sound, nothing. Elias swallowed hard. He wanted to leave, drive back to Herr Alfred, and forget this whole thing. But something inside him, that restless need for answers, held him there. He turned slowly, scanning the faint outlines of crumbling buildings through the fog. One stood out among them, an old chapel, its roof half collapsed and its doors barely hanging on their hinges. The same church he had seen earlier with the strange carvings on its door. Maybe there were records there, old texts, gravestone maps, something that could explain what the keeper had said about a pact. So, gathering what little courage he had left, Elias headed toward the chapel. The door groaned as he pushed it open, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the hollow stillness. Inside, the air was damp and stale, thick with dust and decay. Faded pews leaned to one side. Broken glass from stained windows littered the floor, and at the far end stood a crooked altar covered in cobwebs. He raised his flashlight and noticed something curious. Behind the altar, a narrow wooden door, almost invisible in the dim light. It looked newer than the rest of the building, as though someone had replaced it more recently. Elias hesitated, his instincts screaming to turn back. But curiosity won. He gripped the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a steep stairway leading downward into darkness. He muttered softly to himself, "Every horror movie rule says don't go down there." And yet here I am. With his camera recording, he descended the stairs. Each step groaned beneath his weight, dust falling in small clouds with every movement. The air grew colder, and then, at the bottom, he saw it. A small stone room. Candle stubs melted to the floor, and in the center, an old wooden table. On the table lay a single leather-bound book, its cover blackened and cracked with age. Elias approached cautiously. His flashlight beam glinted off a rusted chain that had once locked the book shut, now broken. He brushed away the dust and read the faded inscription on the front. The Testament of Graven Hollow. His heart skipped. He sat slowly, setting the camera on the table to film as he opened the book. The pages were brittle and smelled of old smoke. The handwriting inside was neat but hurried, as if written in fear. The first line made his skin crawl. To whoever finds this, we made a mistake. He read on. The entries told of the town's founding in 1782, settlers who had fled plague and famine, searching for new land. They built Graven Hollow upon ancient ground, unaware that it was already marked by an older civilization, one that believed in binding spirits to protect the living. When sickness came again decades later, the townspeople grew desperate. Their preacher, Father Aldrich Vane, promised salvation through an ancient ritual, one he claimed would protect the town forever. The ritual involved the burial of 7 chosen souls beneath iron-marked graves, sealing away death itself. But something went wrong. The journal described how, on the night of the ritual, the ground trembled. The 7 chosen were buried alive, sacrificed, but instead of sealing away death, it invited it in. Their souls did not rest. They fed, and by morning, the entire town was silent. The last entry was dated October 19, 1786, written by Father Vane himself. The seal is broken. The 7 hunger still. I have buried the bell deep, that its sound may bind them once more. If it tolls again, the gate between their world and ours will open, and Graven Hollow will breathe death again. Elias froze. The bell, the sound he'd heard just minutes ago. His eyes widened. Oh God! He flipped through the last few pages and noticed something scribbled in a different handwriting, maybe added much later. The keeper guards the gate. The bell calls the lost. The one who listens will take their place. Elias stared at the line, his pulse thundering. The one who listens will take their place. Then he heard it again, faint, echoing up from the stairway behind him. Footsteps, slow, uneven, coming closer. He turned off his flashlight and held his breath. The sound continued, one careful step at a time, creaking the old wooden stairs. He whispered to himself, "It's the keeper. It has to be." But when the figure finally reached the bottom of the stairs, it wasn't the keeper. It was a woman. Her clothes were tattered, soaked in mud, her hair hanging in long, wet strands over her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, wide and hollow, locked directly on Elias. She tilted her head, as if listening to something. Then she spoke in that same faint, trembling voice he had heard before. "You shouldn't have read it." Elias stumbled back, his flashlight flickering violently. The woman stepped closer, her bare feet dragging against the floor, leaving wet footprints that glistened in the dim light. "You've heard the bell," she whispered, her voice echoing as if from far away. "Now they'll hear you." The room seemed to pulse with sound, low, rhythmic, like the earth itself breathing. The journal pages fluttered on the table, though there was no wind. Elias grabbed his camera and bolted up the stairs, heart pounding in his chest. He didn't dare look back. As he reached the chapel's main hall, the door behind him slammed shut with a deafening bang. And through the cracked, stained glass above, he saw shapes moving, dozens of them, in the fog outside. Waiting, watching. The chapel trembled as if the air itself had turned against Elias. His heart thudded so loud he could barely hear his own breath. Through the cracked stained glass windows, he saw those ghostly shapes drifting just beyond the fog, silent, still, watching him. He pressed his back against the wall, gripping his camera like a weapon. The red light blinked steadily, recording everything. He whispered to himself, "Stay calm. Just stay calm." Outside, the whispers began again, soft, layered, overlapping. It sounded like dozens of voices speaking at once, but none clear enough to understand. They grew louder, echoing off the chapel walls, until the words finally formed. "Join us. Finish what began. 7 must stand again." Elias clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices weren't coming from outside. They were inside his head. He stumbled toward the door, pushing it open into the dense fog. The world beyond was a blur of gray and movement. The cemetery stretched endlessly, every gravestone now pulsing faintly with a dull, blue light, as if the ground itself was waking up. Then he saw them, 7 graves in a perfect circle near the center of the cemetery. Their stones were darker than the rest, carved with strange, spiraling symbols that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Each grave bore a single name, barely legible beneath moss and grime. Elias crouched to film them, reading aloud as he brushed the dirt away. Lorian Hale, Mercy Fenwick, Tobias Marr, Edith Crow, Silas Vane. He paused at the 5th name. Vane, same as the preacher from the journal. That meant the others must have been the chosen souls Father Vane had buried alive. He continued, Marion Keene, and the last one stopped him cold. Elias Crowther. He froze. His name, carved into the 7th stone. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. His vision blurred. No, this is some kind of trick, he whispered. Someone did this before I came, but the dates didn't make sense. The last line read, born 1987, died. The last part was empty, waiting. A deep vibration rippled through the ground. Elias stumbled back, the camera shaking in his hand. The fog above the circle began to twist upward, forming a spiral. The air filled with the low, echoing toll of a distant bell, once, twice, then again. The sound seemed to come from below the earth. The graves cracked. Elias fell backward as the ground split open, and from within the circle, shapes began to rise. Pale, translucent forms, their faces hidden beneath veils of mist. The 7, their movements were slow, deliberate. The whispering returned, this time surrounding him entirely. We waited. We watched. The circle must complete. Elias tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. It felt like the air had turned to mud around him, holding him in place. His flashlight flickered violently, and for a split second, he saw their faces, hollow eyes, stretched mouths frozen in agony, their hands reaching for him. He shouted, "Stop! I didn't do anything." But one of the figures, a tall man with hollow sockets where eyes should have been, stepped closer. His voice was low, echoing like it came from underground. "You carry his blood." Elias stared at him, shaking his head. "Whose blood?" The man's mouth twisted. "Aldrich Vane's, the one who bound us." His line must finish the circle. Elias froze. His mind spun. His grandmother's maiden name, Vane. He remembered it suddenly. A family name no one in his family ever talked about. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." But the ground rumbled again, louder this time, and cracks spread across the cemetery like veins. From each grave, dark mist poured upward, forming a swirling column of shadow that reached for the sky. The voices rose to a scream. Hundreds now, not just 7. Elias stumbled back, clutching the camera. I can't be part of this." Then, from the fog behind him, came the sound of slow footsteps. He turned, and there stood the keeper. His eyes glowed faintly, and his face looked older, almost skeletal under the dim light. "I told you not to wake them," he said softly. "You read the words, you heard the bell, and now you've bound yourself to the circle." Elias's voice cracked. "You knew this would happen. You could have stopped me." The keeper shook his head. "I am not their master, only their watcher. Every century, they call for one to take his place. The blood must renew the seal, or Gravenhollow will rise again." Elias looked around, the fog tightening around him like a noose. "There has to be another way." The keeper's face darkened. "There isn't." From the circle, the 7 spirits reached out again, their hands trembling, their whispers now frantic. "Join us. Restore the seal. End the hunger." The ground beneath Elias split open, revealing a pit of darkness that seemed bottomless. Wind roared upward, carrying with it the faint sound of screaming. Thousands of voices, desperate and endless. The keeper's voice broke through the noise. "If you take your place, the whispers will stop. But if you resist..." The wind grew louder, dragging Elias closer to the circle. The soil beneath his feet shifted like it was alive. His camera fell from his hands, clattering against a gravestone. still recording as it captured his terrified face. He screamed, "No, I won't die here." Then, silence. Everything stopped. The fog froze in midair, motionless. The spirits paused, their faces turned towards something behind Elias. A faint light shimmered from the church ruins. Faint, golden, pure. The bell tower. It was tolling again, but this time it sounded different. Not a call of summoning. A warning. The keeper turned sharply. "That's impossible." Elias followed his gaze. Through the fog, he saw the figure of a woman, the same one from the chapel basement, standing near the tower, her face now calm, almost human. She raised one pale hand toward him. "Run," she whispered. "Finish it before they do." The keeper's eyes widened. "She's breaking the seal." But before he could finish, the ground beneath them erupted with light. The seven screamed, their forms unraveling in the brightness as the bell's toll rolled through the cemetery like thunder. Elias threw his arms over his face as everything dissolved into blinding white. The earth shaking, the air screaming, the whispers turning into one final, deafening roar. The world was nothing but white. A shrill ringing filled Elias's ears. Not the bell, not the wind. Something deeper, something inside him. The air itself pulsed with light, then dimmed again, revealing fragments of the world returning. He was lying in the middle of the cemetery, the fog now thin and ghostly. The graves stood silent. The spiral of dark mist was gone, and the seven had vanished. His head throbbed as he pushed himself up, gasping for air. The camera lay nearby, still recording, its lens cracked but functional. The red light blinked weakly in the dark. The woman was standing a few feet away, near the center of the circle where the ground had split. The light from the bell tower behind her had faded to a soft golden glow. She looked at Elias with sad, almost human eyes. "It's not over," she said softly. "You broke the seal before they could take you. But now it must be finished, or they'll return stronger." Elias swallowed hard, still shaking. "Who are you?" She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the cold earth. "My name was Mercy Fenwick," she said. "One of the seven. I was the only one who didn't agree to the sacrifice. I was forced beneath the ground with the rest." Her voice trembled with something that sounded like regret. "When the ritual failed, our souls were trapped here, neither dead nor alive. I've waited centuries for someone to hear me, someone who could end it." Elias shook his head slowly. "End it how?" "You said I have his blood, Father Vanes. If I finish the circle, I die." Mercy nodded. "Yes, but if you don't, every soul bound here will rise. The fog will spread beyond this place, and soon there will be no silence left in the world." He looked around. The cemetery seemed to stretch endlessly now, its horizon swallowed by darkness. The air vibrated with faint whispers again, like restless breathing just beneath the soil. Elias's voice cracked. "There has to be another way." Mercy's eyes softened. "There isn't, but you can choose how it ends." The keeper appeared then, emerging from the mist like a shadow come alive. His face was pale and cracked, like old porcelain, his eyes hollow but still burning faintly. "I told you, boy," he rasped. "This land needs a guardian, one with blood that binds." Elias turned on him, furious. "You used me. You could have warned me before I set foot here." The keeper's lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Would you have listened? None ever do. The curious always dig, until the dirt swallows them." He stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "I was the last to bear the name. I served 100 years beyond death, keeping the seal intact. But my time is gone. The curse needs another." Elias felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "You were Father Vane." The keeper's eyes flickered. "Once, long ago, I built this prison, thinking I could control it. But the dead have their own rules." Mercy turned to Elias, her voice almost pleading now. "If you take the place willingly, the town will sleep forever. The whispers will stop. But if you walk away..." The fog thickened again, swirling violently around the graves. The air turned cold, and far in the distance, the bell gave a single, hollow dong. The ground shuddered. The whispering turned into screams. Elias fell to his knees, clutching his ears. The noise was unbearable, like 1,000 voices crying out for release. The earth split open around the 7 graves once more, dark mist clawing its way up from below. Mercy knelt beside him, her voice calm despite the chaos. "You can end it, Elias. You don't have to die afraid. Just speak the vow." He looked up at her, tears cutting through the dirt on his face. "What vow?" She placed her cold hand over his. "Repeat after me. As silence binds, so I remain." The wind howled. The keeper's voice roared over it. "Do it. Now." Elias took a deep breath, his voice trembling as he shouted into the storm. "As silence binds, so I remain." The ground exploded with light. A shockwave rippled through the cemetery, tearing through the fog, scattering the mist like ash in the wind. The 7 figures rose once more, not in torment this time, but calm, their faces peaceful. They looked at him one last time, then faded, dissolving into the air like dust caught in sunlight. Mercy smiled faintly as she began to vanish too. "You've set us free. Thank you. Wait." Elias reached for her, but his hand passed through. Her voice faded to a whisper. "Keep them quiet, Elias Crowther. Keep them safe." The light dimmed, the fog cleared, and silence fell, heavy and absolute. When Elias opened his eyes again, it was morning. The cemetery looked ordinary. The graves were old but untouched, the fog gone, the sunlight pale and clean. He stood alone in the stillness. The camera lay beside him, its battery somehow full again. The screen flickered once, then displayed a message he hadn't seen before. "Recording complete, 3:12 a.m. He picked it up and turned slowly, taking one last look at the graves. The 7th stone now bore a full inscription. Elias Crowther, born 1987, died 2025. His hands trembled. "No, I'm alive." But as he whispered, his voice didn't echo. Not once. And when he looked down at the ground, there were no footprints where he stood. The wind stirred the grass softly. A single, faint whisper carried on the air. "As silence binds." Elias closed his eyes. "So I remain." And that was Graven Hollow. A town erased from history, but not from the whispers of the earth. Elias went there seeking a story, and became part of one that time itself had tried to bury. If you felt the chill, if you heard the whisper too, tell me in the comments what you think really happened to Elias. Did he die there? Or did he become something else, a guardian of silence? And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good scare. You never know, maybe they'll hear the whispers too. Until next time, keep your lights on.